If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description.
I got you $1. Oh, you almost had it. You gotta be quicker than that.
The Throne is a game you'll know immediately if you want to give it a shot or not, simply by taking a look at its visuals. One look, and you're instantly transported back to a time when thugs ruled Toronto. Anamanaguchi's fiery chiptunes warmed up those cold city streets for another winter, and the world was reminded that the beat-em-up genre was still a fun way to waste an afternoon. Sorry, give me a moment. Let me just... Yeah, that's the stuff. You've probably gathered I'm a fan of Scott Pilgrim, and though I can admit Scott's game hasn't aged particularly well, its visuals have aged like a fine Bordeaux. So you can imagine my excitement upon seeing the Thrones trailer. A Metroidvania with Scott Pilgrim visuals?
Shut up and take my money!
But I should probably know what the game's about before diving in. You play as Eder, a soldier in the midst of a 2-year siege to reclaim his murdered king's castle from a band of orcs and traitors. Alright, I'm good. Time to beat up some orcs to see if the Throne is a worthy Metroidvania.
Combat.
For a game with visuals harkening back to a classic beat-em-up, is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World considered a classic? Let me know what you think in the comments. The Throne's combat's pretty threadbare and uninteresting. It looks cool, almost Devil May Cry-esque, but it's really just Eder's basic combo. It's funny because Eder does all this jumping and hitting automatically and will absolutely jump into a hazard if you're not paying attention. It's hilarious. There's also some jank to it. If I just swing my sword without hitting anything, Eder will just do the initial hit in a combo over and over. But if I'm close to an enemy and attack without first turning around, he'll go off like a lunatic instead of stopping and letting me turn around and fight proper. I got hit a lot because of this jank. It's hilarious. But overall, combat felt simplistic yet fine. Eder does have a defensive option in his shield. Each shield comes with a set amount of times you can use it. And once a shield's been used up, you can't use it again until you repair it by pressing the left bumper and spending coins. Shields can block every attack in the game except for one attack from the final boss. Other than that, don't be afraid to use that shield. Repairing it costs money, but the amount is so minuscule it doesn't really matter. Eder eventually gets other moves to fight back these orcs. He gets a roll that lets you dodge out of the way, a grapple so he can knee people to death, a stomp that lets you stomp on downed opponents, and a charged attack that I never used because it didn't feel great. But the stomp, that felt wonderful. Eder also gets consumables, which I guess is this game's magic because it requires MP to use. There are 4 consumables total, and I never used them because I'd run out of them too quickly. And they never really did enough damage to justify giving them a second thought. A couple of these consumables are actually quite useful, but I'll discuss that in the next section. As far as their combat usage goes, they were a fart in the wind. Now, in the game's defense, you can level your character in a way that makes these consumables more powerful, but why would you ever do that when you can make a strength build? Think about it. I can level my intelligence so the attack I can use 3 times hits a little harder, or I can level my strength and make the infinite amount of regular attacks I can do hit harder. Ironically, it's smarter to invest in strength than intelligence. And that's why we only do strength builds on this channel, boys. The bosses in this game were few and not very great. There were 5 in all, and they were all cake except for the final boss, who I thought was just okay. Probably the only decent boss in the bunch because it had some bite. The rest were super easy with overly simplistic patterns. The first boss starts with an interesting gimmick where you have to find blocks and throw them at him in order to make him vulnerable. And then it ends with an interesting gimmick where you have to step on buttons to aim and fire a cannon to finish him off. But other than that, bosses are just jump and hit affairs. Just don't get hit while jumping around because it takes Eder forever to get up. That'll do it for combat. There are options here, but nothing takes the orcs out faster than using your regular sword attacks and then stomping them to death with your chest plate. Yeah, we'll get into that in the next section.
Abilities. Platforming.
So, stomping with your chest plate, huh? Yep. It's weird. Okay, so first off, you gain upgrades by finding Sid the blacksmith. He's all over the place and for some reason only gives you one piece of equipment at a time every time you find him. Either this game's just being silly or we have ourselves a Nurse Joy situation. Anyway, you find Sid and he returns to you your armor he's been working on. Each piece of armor changes up Eddar's appearance, which is a nice touch, and the equipment gives him new abilities. This is where the game gets a little more silly. Most of these upgrades make sense, like how the helmet lets you break bricks with your head, while others are just odd, like how your boots let you roll and your chest plate lets you stomp. The game rationalizes this by saying the breastplate makes you heavier, therefore you can now stomp and break blocks because you're so heavy now. But it's still a little weird, right? Why not make the boots give you the stomping upgrade? Anyway, it really doesn't matter. The game's tone is that of silliness, and this decision definitely fits that tone. As for the upgrades you get, they're fine. Most are tried and true MV staples like a roll that's essentially a slide, the stomp that's essentially a faster version of a ground pound, and a double jump. The more interesting abilities come in Eddar's consumables. You can throw the boomerang through surfaces so you can grab items, which comes in handy. And the pig is basically your early game high jump until you find the double jump. The problem is that these consumables get consumed too quickly. There were plenty of times I needed the pig to get to higher places, but I'd run out of pig uses too quickly and be forced to grind in some area to get MP so I could use the pig again. And grinding is never fun. As for the game's platforming, there's nothing of note here, which is fine for a combat-heavy MV. My only gripe is with the 3D assets the game uses in some rare instances. It was tough to discern when I could stay on a platform or when I would fall off of it because it was receding to the background. But there are like 3 instances of this, so it's not a huge issue. And that's it for this section. Abilities are pretty standard, but each ability also has a combat function, and I always like that.
Progression.
The throne actually allows for a decent amount of player expression for a Metroidvania clocking in at barely 4 hours. There are many different swords to equip, each with different damage outputs, a bunch of shields with differing blocking amounts, and a leveling system with 3 stats to focus on: strength, intelligence, and luck. I spoke briefly already about leveling during the combat section, so I'll be brief. You kill stuff to gain XP, gain enough, and you gain a level. Each level comes with a point you can allocate to one of the 3 stats I mentioned. Strength increases your sword's base damage, intelligence increases your consumables damage, and luck affects drop rates from enemies. Beyond that, stats don't impact much else, like what gear you could equip or anything like that, but still, pretty cool you can create different builds, even though doing anything other than strength feels pointless. If you want to increase your HP or MP, you'll have to find hearts and gems, respectively, during exploration. Considering you can get killed fairly quickly in this game if you're not paying attention, and consumables run out so quickly, both of these items are imperative to find along the way and are always exciting when you actually find them. I suppose you can say this game has a healthy economy. It has a shop with swords and shields, and you can use coins to repair your shield, but only if you can catch the little f***ers. There is one side quest in the game, but it felt kind of pointless. There are prisoners hidden throughout the castle. Finding and freeing a prisoner gives you some coins, and finding and freeing all of them does nothing. I mean, you get an achievement that's a Metal Slug reference, and that's rad, but there's no huge reward for saving all of them. Unless there is, and I just didn't figure it out. And that's it for progression. You surprisingly have some options for player expression here, but only if you're okay with making inferior builds. You should always go with the best sword and shield available to you, and the 2 stats you can allocate points that aren't strength don't impact the game very much.
Exploration.
Exploration in the throne was needlessly tedious and can be easily fixed. Improve that in-game map. The throne does that thing Shantae Risky's Revenge and Venture to the Vile does, where you go in and out of different planes, moving from the foreground to the background and vice versa. Except, the throne doesn't do that for each small area. Instead, the throne has 2 independent maps you run back and forth between. This is a cool concept, but they dropped the ball hard on this in 2 ways. 1, there's no way to look at both maps at the same time or switch between the maps so you can figure out where to go next. And 2, the map doesn't label the locations where you can move between the 2 maps. Had the devs made it possible to do these 2 things with the in-game map, the throne's exploration would have been so much more manageable and pleasant. But these aren't the only things that the map lacked. I would have loved a way to mark up the map so I could easily return to places where I was getting abilities. And making each biome a different color would have done wonders. Overall, the map was really poor, but was the exploration rewarding? Yeah, I think so. Like I said earlier, finding hearts and gems to increase your HP and MP felt great, and lucking upon a sweet weapon from a random enemy drop was always a thrill. And freeing the prisoners, though largely unrewarding, still felt great to do. I think my favorite thing about the Thrones exploration was searching for the critical path once you unlocked a new upgrade. Even though the game is strictly linear, there were so many locations you needed to find in order to progress that felt random. Yet, finding them was important. There's just something about the surprise of a seemingly innocuous platform or insignificant path concealing something important that gets that dopamine flowing. Also, the game did some other really cool things that are a bit spoilery. Go to this timestamp to skip these minor spoilers or return back in about
60
seconds. First off, check this out. You need to find this to progress in the game, and though the game drops some environmental hints, hiding something just barely off screen is still a pretty cool place to hide something. I noticed it the moment I tried to leave the screen, and it stuck with me ever since. I love when MVs do weird stuff like this. I also loved that you needed to equip a certain sword to see in the catacombs. I know this isn't entirely new, but I love when MVs use a variety of utility gating options in their games. Keeps me on my toes, especially when I don't expect it. So I felt smart when I figured this out. And in the end, isn't making players feel smart what a good MV should do? Let me know what you think in the comments. That'll do it for this section. Exploration in the Throne has its ups and downs, but the good thing is the downs mainly apply to the in-game map. If my complaints about the map don't concern you, then you're going to be fine with the Throne's exploration. Finding stuff feels great, and discovering the path forward in many instances makes you feel clever. And hey, who's to say the devs don't send out a patch that updates the map? Devs love making my videos outdated, and good on them for doing so. Oh, I forgot. Fast travel in this game is riding pigs.
Atmosphere. Narrative.
It should come to no surprise that I love the Throne's visuals. Even a lot of Eddar's animations look exactly like something from Versus the World, and I thought the enemy designs were pretty good. It's so easy to just make generic orcs and call it a day, but I love what they did with the orcs' armor in this game. I think it gives them a lot of personality. Speaking of personality, the Throne doesn't take itself too seriously with its goofy animations and silly upgrading premise of having to find your equipment that you sent to the blacksmiths for repairs, so you're essentially going into war with nothing. It's good stuff. I'm also a fan of the game's presentation. The Throne feels a lot like I'm playing a long-lost Sega Genesis game. From its sound design to its ability explanations to the after-boss battle victory pose. This game is really pulling all my nostalgic strings. Just listen to this music. Tell me that doesn't sound like something that came straight out of the Sega Genesis. Overall, I've got no complaints when it comes to the Throne's presentation. I think it looks and sounds gorgeous, and it has a very high degree of polish, though it does have some jank. As far as narrative goes, there's not much here, and what is here is serviceable. You're a soldier that must reclaim the castle, and to do that, you must make it to the throne room. Really nothing narratively substantial happens from the beginning of the game till when you get to the throne room. And even its ending is just kinda goofy, which is what I expected. I don't think there are multiple endings. I rescued every prisoner, but I didn't get anything for it, and the prisoners never show up in the end. So I'm gonna call it and say this game only has one ending. So yeah, that's it for this section. I thought the Throne's presentation was top notch, and its narrative was just okay. But considering the game's silliness, I'm pretty sure narrative wasn't a top priority for the devs, and that worked in the Throne's favor.
Final thoughts and score.
The Throne is alright. Personally, I loved it for its Scott Pilgrim-esque visuals and overall retro feel, especially with those Sega Genesis-inspired tunes. The game's presentation was enjoyable, and its polish impressive. Combat wasn't particularly challenging and could feel janky at times, but mostly I found slashing and punching and stomping orcs to death enjoyable. But the in-game map really holds it back and hurts its exploration. If I could make a recommendation, I'd say put in some color to differentiate the biomes, let players mark it up for convenient backtracking, allow players to see both of the game's maps whenever they want, and show players locations on the map where they can travel between the two maps. Could this be done in a patch? I have no idea. I'm not a developer. But if it could be done in a patch, I'd say do it because it'd make your game so much better and make backtracking much less tedious. I award The Throne a 7 out of 10. The Throne is available on PC and has been announced for the PlayStation, but I don't have specifics on whether it'll be available on the PS4, PS5, or both, nor do I have specifics on a release date. I played The Throne on the Steam Deck flawlessly. However, it took some light finagling to get it to work properly. The devs have posted instructions on how to get the game to work on the deck and have stated they are currently working on a solution to ensure the game can play on the deck natively. I'll flash the deck instructions on the screen now. Because you have to do some back-end shenanigans to get the game to work properly on the deck, I'm giving The Throne a Steam Deck rating of unsupported. Seems silly because I played it on the deck and all the footage I'm sharing is from the deck, but I can't say it's officially verified until the devs implement their solution. Just know that The Throne totally can be played on the Steam Deck with 0 issues. Just follow these instructions.
Tier placement.
As a Metroidvania, The Throne isn't bad. Its map is, but the game does a lot of other things well, beyond its presentation. Combat and platforming are fine, and it does some cool and clever things when it comes to utility gating. Plus, it's a short experience. You can probably take this game out in an evening if its map and backtracking don't frustrate you too much. The Throne sieges its way into the C tier. I tell you, if they could update that map to be something useful, The Throne would be a far better experience for gamers. I do think older gamers like me, who grew up during the 16-bit era, will appreciate the game regardless. Just don't expect The Throne to be crowned the next big thing for Metroidvanias. You get it? It's called The Throne, and I used crown, and yeah, I knew you'd get it.